Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Pramay. I'm a founder at Oid Labs, and I'll be the host for today's discussion. I'm very excited for today's discussion because Kyle has agreed to be our guest today. Welcome to the show, Kyle.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So for the folks who don't know Kyle already, Kyle is a highly distinguished AI scientist. He's the host of a very popular podcast series called Data Skeptics. He has been a dear friend over the years, a mentor. I've enjoyed working with him in close collaboration. I've learned a lot from him. And outside of podcasts and when he's not mentoring, he runs a very successful AI consulting firm, where he's helping small and medium-sized enterprises to design, develop, and deploy AI initiatives. Let's dive into the topics right away. So, a lot has happened in this last couple of years. A lot is happening. A lot is happening as we speak. So, first question, I think, first question that we can use to kickstart this discussion would be, what are your thoughts about the hype contributed by media and industry for different reasons, and the reality of the current state of LLMs? And do you think if we have oversold on the promise of scaling law?
Well, that's tough to say in many ways because the hype is there, but it's also justified in a lot of respects. LLMs in general are a massive leap forward and can fill so many spaces in industries and in our daily lives and this sort of thing. So I don't think the media hype is inappropriate. If anything, maybe it needs to be there more and encouraging people to start using these tools in their everyday lives. I think every student, 100% of students should be using an LLM every day, and probably 100% of people. They're just that useful of a tool. So the hype I'm okay with, as long as it's honest hype. If you say, oh, we're going to cure all diseases in one go with just a prompt, obviously that's science fiction. But you've highlighted one of the key promises, that the scaling laws, that as we push more compute, more data, and more parallelization through the same process, we'll get a better performance and a better output. And historically, that's been working very well, just like Moore's law worked very well for a long time. But Moore's law got a little fuzzy, let's say, in 2014 maybe. It's tough to say exactly where you draw the line, says, has it broken or anything like that? But that's a precursor that I think is a good use case to talk against. It seems Moore's law is not only kind of broken, but also we've realized the number of chips per dollar isn't necessarily what matters. Sometimes it's, let's get cheap chips and use them in a massively parallel way, which is kind of how we got to a lot of the LLM breakthroughs. But the scaling laws, I think we're in a similar boat. If you look at all of the published stuff on it to date, we seem to be following them, but there's a lot of variance in that data, and it might be the case we're now hitting a ceiling.
Right. But then this brings up to the second question, is we are bounded by finite amount of data that we have access to. So the Richardson's thought process with respect to the bit lessons of throwing a computer at a problem and the amount of data, and most of the time it'll be more successful than any sophisticated algorithm for a certain task. And historically, like you said, that has been true. But we are bounded by a certain threshold of the amount of data that we are currently producing as humans. And so then that brings in additional set of questions, that is it just with respect to throwing compute at a problem versus also trying to figure out new architectures, new transformations with respect to the innovations that have happened, especially around the large language model space?
So for me, I wouldn't discourage more investment in models and architectures. I think that's promising and good, but that's not where I would make my biggest bet. That's not where I would invest personally, because if, and you know, this isn't my original idea. I think it's becoming sort of common parlance to say, like, fancy models don't matter. It's simple models scaled up and with a massive throughput of a large data set that becomes the secret to success.
Right. Right. So what you're saying is, as we are exploring and throwing compute, and compute is going to get cheaper and efficient, there is also a need to streamline on new ways of how we generate data. It doesn't necessarily have to be human generated. Maybe there's an aspect of people exploring synthetic data explorations. But
yeah, I mean, there's an open question right now. No one really knows the answer to, even though we have some luminaries, you know, as mentioned on your slide here, that have thoughts on it. The truth is, no one knows. We're in unexplored territory. If we double the compute, double the investment, double everything, will we get double the output? We don't know. We'll get more than 1.0 out of it, I'm sure, but I don't know what the asymptote looks like. And one of my central areas of doubt is in comparison to the only known way we have for producing general intelligence, and that's the biological route. You can have a child, you can raise it and educate it, and the amount of energy in the form of calories you have to put in that child is very small, actually, to get them to be, you know, kind of a functioning adult capable of doing work. And if you compare that to large language models, we're expending massive amounts of energy, way more in terms of like sort of a kcal perspective. So that leads me to believe that even though we've had a breakthrough here in the transformer architecture and these approaches, we're also missing something, because the problem should be easier, it seems.
true. And I think I have a few questions down this discussion for you in that regard. But taking a step back, as we're talking about compute and data, like you mentioned, some visionaries, Musk, taking a slightly more optimistic stand in terms of, like, we're going to reach to AGI maybe in a couple of years, and that would be the end game of humanity, and trying to figure out what would be the meaning if robots and automated system are going to take away all the redundant tasks that we as humans have trained ourselves to be good at over a period of time. Versus we have other visionaries like Jan LeCun, who doesn't feel, and that might be slightly aligned to maybe on the biological example that you just mentioned, where he feels that we are not that close yet. There are limitations on the way we are training the model, and there has to be a certain interaction with the physical world, so on. And so where I'm going with all of this is that, do you think with this ambitious claims, which are there with respect to AGI or ASI, or timelines? So me being pro AI also, I feel that is the future, completely in agreement. Where I'm skeptical is on the timeline, because even from the visionaries, like you said, it is sort of a wild west at this point, where we don't know it's a couple of years to a 30 years by Jeffrey Hinton, or a decade or 20 years far away as per Jan LeCun, and Musk maybe in a couple of years. So if you look at the time frame, somebody says it's coming tomorrow versus in 30 years. And that has thrown everybody in sort of an uncertainty space, where we all are trying to figure out, so how do we build? What do we build? How do we educate our future generation, and so on? And so the question sort of becomes now is, do you feel, because of these ambitious claims, for different reasons, we have also pushing the AI initiative into sort of a winter zone, where deep learning used to be, because of the high.
Sure. So to the degree that there was an AI winter, it was just that there were over promises and more hype than was appropriate for the hardware available at the time. The ideas going back to even the conference, what was it, at Dartmouth in the 50s or 60s, they had a lot of the right ideas. The perceptron is the basic idea we still use today, albeit, yes, in sort of a souped up Red Bull kind of version. You know, the the transformer is quite an impressive architecture. I don't want to take that away, but it's more or less the perceptron. It wasn't that there was, people in the 60s and 70s were just, they had no vision or thought of how to develop this. All the ideas were there. They just didn't have the hardware to do it. And at the same time, though, I think we're missing at least one key component. The transformer was a major step forward. It's like, all right, imagine you were trying to invent the first car. What did it need? I don't even know cars very well, but it needed internal combustion engine, right? Probably. Maybe it needed a transmission and a wheel axle and a couple of other technologies. Let's say there were 10 insights, if you want to label them that way and count them that way, 10 insights that brought us the car. Let's say there are 10 insights that bring us to AI. I think we have 7 of them. Oh, sorry, that bring us to AGI, artificial general intelligence. I think we probably have 7 of them. And okay. I'm, speaking a little metaphorically, I don't have them picked out like my list, but there's something missing. We don't know what, but we've made a lot of major stair-step breakthroughs. If there was a winter, it was just a winter waiting for a spring where there was a massive leap forward. So there hasn't been a lot of methodological breakthroughs, I would say, in the last couple years. There's been variants of things, 5% improvement kinds of things, and those are valuable, of course, to be doing, but it's not like there's been a new idea that reshaped me the way Word2Vec reshaped me over a decade ago.
Okay. So sorry, so you're saying that things that have changed from the past is, one, the compute has become much better, and there the bottleneck was the compute. And then you're also suggesting that, like, even if the core fundamentals might be tied to the use of perceptron, that has historically been the case. The transformation architecture has helped us realize in that journey few steps forward. But is this like an exponential breakthrough? We are still in that journey to figure it out. Did I get you right?
Yeah, I think precisely.
Okay. So that's great. So to the point that you mentioned, if it has helped us move few steps forward in that journey of whatever the definition of AGI, ASI, superintelligence is, do we find ourselves as researchers, implementers, users of AI, that something has changed in this last, I would say maybe in year and a half, in terms of how we are using a lot of these tooling for a day-to-day task?
Yeah, absolutely. It's what I call the last mile problem, to make an analogy to the telecom industry. So you had to lay all your cables, first twisted pair, now it's fiber, maybe it'll be something else in the future. You got to put all that infrastructure in, and it's easy to put in big, dense urban areas, but you want to get it to every person in America. We all deserve the internet. We all deserve high-speed internet. So the last mile, how do you get it from the sort of civic infrastructure out to the people? There's a good analogy here of, like, how do we get the large language models into every aspect of every product? And I think there's been a good mix of people in industry doing that, figuring out clever ways to leverage these technologies. Maybe sometimes, an established company is now on the decline because they were failing to innovate. But I think we're in an era where software engineers who know how to use the large language model, they might even be completely ignorant of AI, just understanding that, text in, text out, or text in, ask for a JSON something out that you can use in software. That is a tool that we just need to push into every aspect of software. And also, half the time it can write that software for you. So I think we're maybe at the 50th percentile of that last mile world, where there's a lot of gains to be made just hooking up the technology that's already been invented. No new innovations, just put the innovations into every place. And 2 examples I have are the command line and the browser. They really don't have good integration. When you go to your command line, natively at least, there's nothing there for an LLM. I have some project we could talk about if you want, but it has a way of using my open API key I can ask a question at the prompt. So I put like 2 question marks, which is just a script thing that was set up. And then I type my prompt. I need a script that's going to go through all these folders recursively and delete any files bigger than this amount, something like that, where me as like, I know Linux, but I don't use it day to day. That would take me 10 minutes to figure out. I just ask for the prompt and I get it. And then I say, run it. So the operating systems haven't really delivered on that promise perfectly well yet. So I have this hacky project that I've, open source thing I've installed, but the command line for me and also the browser, there's no real presence of a large language model there. That's areas where we do a lot of work that I think we'll see that technology eventually find the right product fit to come into our lives.
Okay. So those are great examples. Do you find yourself using AI writing tools as such, like for drafting needs or for image generation, for generating logos or whatnot? Do any of these use cases you found yourself, oh, I wasn't tinkering with those maybe a couple of years ago, but now since it's so readily available, oh, sure, maybe I can design my own t-shirt.
Yeah, there's, it goes both ways. There's obviously an early hype cycle and promise on that. When you first saw image generation and text generation, I thought, oh, I'll never write an email again. I'll just say what I need and it'll write it for me. And then I'm realizing like, oh, it doesn't really know my tone, or it's not doing exactly what I asked. And then I thought I would become some great prompt engineer and I would find the perfect incantation that I could cast into the machine and it would give me exactly what I want out. And to some degree that worked. But where I find myself today, at least, that the state of the art gives me 90% of what I want. And sometimes that's good enough and sometimes it's not. So in the case of logos and things like, so for my podcast, we do a unique cover every week, and it actually has to come 3 forms. There's 2, it doesn't matter why. And the current state of large language models, even with the diffusion stuff built in, simply cannot deliver for me at a professional level that I'm looking for. So I still rely on my team to develop those sorts of things. I tried to take it on, didn't work, handed it back and said, well, yeah, clearly you guys need to do these images for me, but use the tools you think are appropriate. I have a graphic designer on staff, and I don't care how he comes up with the output of his work. I want it to look as good as possible. It doesn't bother me if he used a paintbrush, Photoshop, or an algorithm, but I do need his artistic vision to guide that and pick the right tool for the right job.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. And I think I have a question. The second question is very directly related to that. So from my 2 cents on that has been that thinking of it like you just mentioned, like perfection. So oftentimes, as AI is getting integrated into the consumer market, when as consumers we use a product, we don't care what is getting done under the surface. So for me, one tooling that I find myself has organically entered into the ecosystem of my day-to-day work is around AI coding. There's been a lot of trending around vibe coding and other different media hype words, etc. But the example that you mentioned about the CLI, taking that as a good starting point, like you mentioned, right? Doesn't have to be perfect. Gives me an idea and a skeleton. It's saving me time, and that I feel like a direct amplification of my work. So that brings up to this next question. What are your thoughts with respect to this slightly different philosophy, ideology of AI, current state of AI LLMs as an augmenter, as an amplifier of the current set of activities and processes and workflows that we find ourselves engraved into, versus it being a replacement and an autonomous replacement towards an autonomous system?
Well, really all of the above. It's going to do all 3 of those things: amplify, augment, and replace, just depending on the scenario and the use case.
Okay.
I think the secret is identifying your task you want to use it for, which is the right approach, right? Sometimes a full-blown replacement is going to get you a worse quality of service. And maybe that's okay if you're, a big box retailer and, your customers don't have a lot of choices. You give them bad customer service with a chatbot, who cares? But at the car dealership, if you lose one deal, that's a lot of money. So I would be surprised if I walked into a car dealership and didn't meet a salesperson immediately, because the possibility of facilitating a transaction is so high, it's high touch. They want a human element there because the human is going to do better in making that conversion happen. So there's different cases. For many years, I had hoped that maybe my podcast would grow to a level where I could hire a full-time researcher. I could never justify that expense, but my dream was, when I have a guest coming up who's confirmed, usually I've read one paper by that guest and I invite them on to talk about that paper. But I was like, well, couldn't the researcher read their 10 most popular papers and give me a bigger report on them, or help me prepare to go in, to this interview? And ChatGPT effectively does that for me. Something I wished I had a full-time salary for, I now can do. It didn't exist before. So one would hope the quality of my interviews has increased as a result of this augmentation. So it's task by task. We could tie it into job loss and things like that, but I think the right solution will find its way out for most people. Everyone should try these tools and understand when they do work and when they don't. Like you were mentioning how you use it for coding, I do as well. And I've learned it doesn't learn. There's certain mistakes it makes. For example, I asked ChatGPT for a lot of like React components for front-end stuff. Yeah. And there's one particular mistake I won't bore you with the nuance of, but it makes it every time. And I'll point it out. Hey, you keep including this, that's going to cause infinite re-renders. Stop doing that. And then here it comes again, because it's learning in a very exotic way compared to how you and I learn.
Right. Yeah, that's a fair point. And that brings up to this other question. So if we, on this debate of augmentation versus replacement, and I think from what you are suggesting is that depending on the task, depending on the domain, maybe we don't have to go for or against, and it's a knob that we adjust. You want zero autonomy, you want level 1, level 2, level 5 autonomy, and we adjust and still have control in terms of the task we want the system or automated system to take care of. So, but on that point, since you brought up that example of a car dealership, which falls into the bracket of customer support and so on, there's, from the market, VCs, investment, AI startups, it's all an ecosystem of a catch-22 problem. There's also a lot of push with respect to voice agents, which historically has existed. And personally, I've hated talking to them. When they call a bank, first thing is the automated system, and I keep trying to figure out a way to come
up from zero, yeah,
till I get to the person. What do you think has changed, or do you think a perception to interacting this with voice agents has changed, or we still have to go through transformation as the systems are getting adopted in, it's not just with respect to banking systems anymore, like you said, it's just getting deployed everywhere?
So while I do think there's been a step forward in the opportunity for customer service, I also see that as mostly a failure in deployment. That as soon as everybody saw ChatGPT, it felt obvious, like, oh yeah, customer service, that's the first job that's going to be lost. But I think that's the opposite of what's happened, really, because people don't want to talk to chatbots. And that's not because we're Luddites, it's because they're not able to solve our issue. If I'm calling customer service, I have an issue. Now, maybe my issue is, what's my bank balance? And yeah, of course, a chatbot could, with the right access to the right APIs, look up my balance and say, oh, you have this balance. Or I could say, how much have I spent on restaurants in 30 days? It could answer that question for me. But I don't generally have those queries of the company. If I'm contacting them, it's because I have a problem. and I don't have confidence that chatbot can solve my problem. I need someone who can do an override, or, you know, Karen me up to a manager kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like, let's I got to be mean and like get escalated, and I need someone who has the right access to understand the circumstance I'm in. So if it's like that, what do they say, the 80-20 problem? Can it solve 80% of the problems? Yeah, probably it can, but it's the 20% that matter. So if your business is simple, like maybe McDonald's, it's very transactional. There's a finite number of menu items. There's not a lot of, I guess you could ask for a weird thing in how you custom order, but within reason, like it's a pretty simple operational transactional system. And we've seen ordering systems have shown up there. A lot of fast food is moving in that direction. And I think because there are limited number of exceptions that can come up, and there's a person, 10 feet away who will handle the exception. But you need something that can handle all exceptions, and the current state of the technology isn't there to do that.
Gotcha. And would you also say that, is it just the problem, or is it also the tone and the voice and the personality of these voice agents? Where I'm going with this is there is also a push to make the voices sound more empathetic, more human-like, not robotic. So right now, we want to press on that zero. Like, I hate how robotic it sounds. I don't know right now that if I don't know it's a robot on the other side of the system, would I care to jump to zero? I don't know that. And that's I'm curious as
Sure.
to see what would that future be.
Yeah, I don't know what the future holds there. To me, I want to get a problem solved, and I don't think a compelling human vocalization and, like maybe somebody, not me personally, but somebody would like it if the thing was a bit flirty with them or whatever, like all that could be programmed. It could do that today, but that doesn't solve the problem that I have when I call customer service any faster.
Right.
Maybe some human beings prefer that. Like, I like the command line, and most people like a user interface, but we started with command line and that evolved. And I think this form of interface will evolve too. It hasn't yet. And I think a lot of that is because of failure to innovate from a product perspective, that we haven't found the right people with the right vision and empowered them to build things that matter. But it may, so it may be that the format takes on a whole new approach. I don't need it to be personalized. I don't care that the computer knows me. It could be indifferent, like the Star Trek The Next Generation computer, where it's flaccid and flat tone, but just does what it's supposed to. That would suit me. But maybe I'm abnormal. Maybe people want to develop a friendship with their operating system. We'll see what happens.
Right. And I think part of the issue in making it starting to sound human-like is that we, or as humans, we have a certain voice signature. And so if we start making it sound human-like, then there would be possibly an abuse of it, which has happened in the past as well, whether for images, now for voice, which starts to become even more tricky because you can sound anybody as somebody else. And then people are like, oh, I didn't give you the permission to use my voice on somebody else's voiceover. There's like, so it's not just, I feel like it's not just like the technical breakthrough, which maybe we might be able to overcome in a shorter time, but it's also the boundaries around the abuse that I feel would sort of start to become a bit tricky in terms of whose data is getting used where and who's giving the permission how. And so it starts to get into this convoluted spaghetti mess, which I think we are still trying to figure out, even with this current progress in LLM with respect to copyright and data issues and whatnot.
Yeah. And there's what they call in film, the uncanny valley. The people point at, what's the movie, the Christmas movie, Midnight Express or something, with Tom Hanks in it. And they tried to make all of the CGI characters look realistic and human, but they just lack a realism that makes it sort of uncomfortable. I think we're hitting a similar problem. Like, you can make it have, they have really good models now to make generative, articulate, bubbly voices of a real person, and this is how I am, or I can be the AM radio voice or whatever. That's doable, but it's almost conveying a sentience that isn't there. So if someone is bubbly and happy and I'm here to solve your problem, and then they don't, and they keep up that tone, that would annoy me if a human being did that to me. So I'm instantly rejecting the agent in that regard.
Right. Makes sense. So diving a little bit into the technical and data privacy issues, and also this idea of closed source versus open source. In the space of LLM, which is right now Wild West, what are your thoughts with respect to push around open source LLMs versus closed source LLMs? Do you have a preference, one versus the other?
So ironically, my preference is for closed source. I love the virtues and everything is great about open source. I'm an open source type of guy, but what I really want out of a lot of these tools as it stands today is a SaaS solution where I can call it with an API and get a response via API, and then it becomes kind of like a CS Oracle. It's an external a remote function call I'm making. And I know that, I would love to be running my own models and have, some data center somewhere and I'm training it, but I'm not so arrogant as to think that me and my team can compete with the major tech giants. We're in an era of innovation. They will continue to innovate and drive their solutions to a commodity cost where we're paying per token. So I love that there's competition. I love that there's diversity. But what I want right now is ease of use while other people do all the innovating.
Okay. And so slight, maybe a contradicting standpoint to what you just mentioned. There has been a lot of, taking a step back, rephrasing it. With the success of models like DeepSeek and Qwen, which for 1/10 of a budget, don't quote me on the exact cost, I'm blanking out there, but 1/10 of a cost to what historically has been spent, they're able to match performance and intelligence to a certain degree what other major vendors have been providing. And so that has brought up that question again, is the best way for us to move forward in this long journey of AGI, ASI, and so forth, then is it not collaborative community effort that's going to push us reach there faster rather than having this closed source?
Oh, well, I think the landscape is a mix. There will always be a Microsoft doing it in kind of a closed way or having their own thing. And many, I don't mean to pick on them, but many companies like that. And if they win, they win and they'll get my business. But yeah, if an open source solution can undercut them, and maybe that's an opportunity for a service to a commercial version to evolve around that, kind of how Red Hat is the commercial complement to Red Hat Linux. Why not? I'd like to see it as a marketplace where I have some number of agents or models available to me and a cost per query or cost per token or whatever it is. I think it's a good way to do that competition to let the best things emerge.
Okay, fair enough. So then diving further into open source versus closed, but going maybe a slightly different aspect of it versus small versus big. Do you have thoughts or preference or ideas around that notion? Do you have my preference would be to go with the small models if I can justify the cost and if it's a cost saving without compromising on intelligence versus big giant models?
In my mind, this is an optimization step. So starting from like a proof of concept, which is a lot of the work my team has done in the last years or so. A business says, we think we can use AI in this way. How do we get started? The fastest way to get started is to work with the large language model and its general use case and see if we can get something going that is operationally useful for you at a cost that's justifiable. And once we're delivering value, then it's the time to optimize. So sometimes that's, is there another model by the same service or another service we can performance test again, or maybe we want to bring something in-house, develop a specialized model, or I forget the exact term people are using for this type of learning, but like tutoring-based learning where you'll train your own model, but maybe it's based on like BERT embeddings or ChatGPT embeddings or something you're borrowing from this large model to bootstrap yourself in the small domain. There's a lot of interesting reasons to do that, but to me, they're all kind of cost savings and optimization steps where you have something working to begin with. Otherwise, I'm inclined to start with the general case tools.
Right. But then what about, so this particular screenshots that I'm showing is, one second. Yeah. So it's based on this paper from NVIDIA, and there have been other studies, we just have picked one recent one. And their argument here has been that, let me go down to the,
This was a good paper. I'm glad you flagged this for me. I hadn't seen it before.
oh, cool. Okay, awesome. Hopefully others would also find it useful.
Oh, definitely.
So taking this, as a driving point for this discussion, they've highlighted 6 pillars. One is about privacy and data security. When the open source thing started happening, at least from my knowledge and understanding, initially it was with Llama 4, not Llama 4, but meta versions of the Llama that got released over time, initially from the bigger models. And then the size started shrinking, distillation and whatnot, different process optimizations for sizing. But so one is smaller models, the appeal is, okay, I get to control it with respect to data privacy and a security aspect of whatever intelligence that needs to be built, which is appealing, right? Because then the data like financial statements and etc. doesn't have to sit on somebody else's server, which I don't have control on, and leaks could happen whenever, and then somebody else has to pay a price, which in this case would be the consumers. So that's one aspect. But if we put a pin on that security for just a tiny bit. Initially, when this phase of AI race started, the whole idea of throwing compute with respect to the size of the model and so on was we were already doing a lot of these sort of fine-tuning, etc. in, let's call it the old ML days. When you have a data set, we do some, whether it is manual feature engineering or automated feature engineering, then we are fine-tuning it on particular use case with respect to a particular target, optimizing it so that it does that one specific task very well. So then from there, we moved to this phase or space of like, okay, what if we have a big giant brain which is able to do a bunch of these different tasks in some form of transfer learning, which led to transformer architecture, and we started seeing signs. Then we said, okay, this is good. Cost is a problem. Then we went down this open source path where we started challenging, hey, can this brain be smaller? And I can still deliver still perform at the same level as that of the bigger brain. So because there is uncertainty on the path to success, each of us is trying out ways to get there. And in the meantime, we're trying to figure out if there are better ways to solve the current 90% of problems that historically all businesses have. And so let me pause and see if you have any comments there.
I think you're describing a really natural progression. Actually, the least convincing part for me is data privacy. I hear where you're coming from, but I've become increasingly skeptical of this idea that I have to manage the data to make it the most secure it can be. No, there are companies that are specialists in managing data in that way. Let them do it. Like Amazon hosting your files on S3, unless you screw up the way you configure the bucket, which 9 times out of 10 is the real issue, if you just configure it correctly, then it's like, all right, which system's going to be more secure? The one Amazon built where thousands of engineers have reviewed it, or the one you and 3 interns who work for you set up that like has some FTP thing or whatever? For sure, theirs is going to be more secure. And when security's key, you should focus on that. So like PII, for example, in all the cases I've been involved with PII, which in full disclosure, it's only really in fraud detection when I encounter a lot of PII, and I've done a lot of fraud projects. I haven't done a lot of like medical projects or anything like that, but you get into names, addresses, phone numbers, emails, and credit card numbers, all of which very sensitive, but all of which don't actually matter to most of the tasks I'm working on. I don't care that your name is Joe Schmo. I care that someone with the name Joe Schmo has done the same action 10 times in a row, and that's atypical. So there are ways of embedding privacy along the way in the raw data that I've always found have been there to solve my needs. So I don't know that like, hey, it should be small so I can manage it and I can keep the data private. That's not so convincing for me. Smallness, I think, becomes an advantage in cost savings for sure. Explainability, because the model is, much less black box, and we can even build stuff around it the same way when you look, vision algorithms can help you look at what each layer helps transform and things like that, and Lime and all these things that you know a lot about too. There's tooling out there if we go a small language or a small model approach that can help a business better understand what they have and mitigate risk around it and control it to an appropriate amount. So I think it's a very useful approach in that regard. And being able to just say like, yeah, we have more control of the solution and we know how it works.
Right. But then the point with respect to not the ambiguousness, but like we move from small space to bigger space in terms of having the intelligence to control and transfer without learning XYZ jobs. So if I'm not trained in accounting, and if I have a smarter system which is able to not only take care of coding but the accounting, then suddenly like, oh, okay, so this is a bigger form of intelligence. But I think what we as community are struggling to maybe figure out, and not necessarily maybe figuring out is a wrong choice of word, is navigating this path of do I go, if I am able to get the same thing done with some guardrails and control parameters, whether it is with respect to fine tuning, do I use my small models, engineering, customization, optimization, or do I go with the bigger model and get the task done? So initially, I feel like the problem was with respect to cost.
Sure.
Right? Because if it's the latest GPT-5 Pro, you have to spend $200, get an enterprise plan, then get access to that model. So one can just make use of the most intelligent model on the fly.
Yeah, if it's a big industrial scale problem, cost is your first consideration.
Right. And so then I feel in that context, at least from my thought process, I find that the open source aspect becomes very appealing, because then there are people fighting with closed source, etc., for different ideology and philosophy. I feel like open source collaboration is the path to that journey that we are all trying to push towards.
Sure.
And boxing the intelligence and having only limited people having access to that, whether it is driven by cost, whether it is driven by some other thought process, it doesn't sit right with me. It's like we're developing a solution to cancer. Initially, the cost for that would be very high. It's like people getting access to go to space. The cost is whatever, $1 million to go around space and so forth. Maybe in 10 years, it will trickle down. But initially, the access is only to the selected few.
Sure. Well, you could put a CubeSat up if you invested, a lot of your savings in it. That's an accessible thing, but or buy a house would maybe be a smarter move.
Right. but you get the point, right? So that to me feels like, okay, so is open source, to me feels like open source is the way to keep challenging that status quo, because competition is very important for rapid innovation, right? And I feel this aspect of open source, even though it, like, different people may use it for in different ways, I feel like it has pushed closed source enterprises to rethink their strategies continuously. Hey, do we, like, for example, Google open sourcing Gemma? Maybe it was driven by some aspect of open source push. OpenAI releasing their older versions of the model, because maybe there was a constant push. Like, so there's like this competition, and I think it's pushing all of us to sort of like be accountable. At the same time, like, sharing also the data that is getting used. So it's like feel like it's a good balance of power, and check and balances maybe in that perspective.
Well, there's three opens, right? Open software. Three aspects. There's your algorithm, your hardware, and your data.
Right.
And the hardware, we all kind of run the same hardware. Maybe you could have a specialized chip, but it's unlikely that would be a real innovation. Yours would just be nominally better. That your compute, the algorithm you run, what history has taught us is that algorithms aren't the secret sauce. You're not going to invent the genius algorithm. It's the simple algorithm scaled up massively that's going to win. So it really looks like data is the winner. So open source software give away how you compute the model that only benefits you. Somebody figures out how to make it 1% faster by doing some low-level optimization. Great, send me a pull request. Everyone benefits. And that's not a true moat for an industry to have, because the algorithms will get figured out by somebody, even if you're a step ahead.
Yeah.
Hardware, same thing. That's more about how much you can provision and your resources and your ability to manage that. But even there's a lot of open source, Kubernetes kind of stuff that can do that for you. So a lot of it comes down to data, and that's probably the least open aspect of the whole discussion.
Yeah, true, very true. Okay. So then continuing our discussion with respect to augmentation and replacement, and then navigating and moving beyond just using LLMs to more agentic systems, which is automating a lot of more complex, heterogeneous workflows and processes. What are your thoughts on navigating value versus the challenges that these agentic systems have delivered on so far? So just to add more context to it, as I have on my screen here as well, and then this is just, I'm just quoting MIT's report here just for context, but there have been other similar findings as well, is only like 5% of the actual experimental prototypes that get developed actually lands up into production for different reasons. Yeah, so let me pause there. And what are your thoughts on like navigating the value add versus the challenges that current agentic systems are able to deliver on?
Well, it's tricky for an organization because there's a lot of promise of potential. I think most people would hear, 5% succeed. That sounds like 95% fail, right? That's an easy math to do. And that doesn't sound like a good number. And as you said, there's many reasons why, but I think that's where you zoom in, because especially for a big organization, you need to be innovating. Otherwise you will fail, because your competitors will innovate. And if you're not leading in innovation, you will fall behind when it comes to AI adoption. But that doesn't mean you can throw money at the problem and that just solves it. If, like, let's say Universal Studios said, hey, we want to do $1 billion investment in AIs. We want all of the screenplays to be written by AI by 2027. I know that's a ridiculous idea. That's terrible of an idea. I'm not saying a screenplay couldn't eventually be generated by an AGI, but you shouldn't expect your scripts to be written in this day and age by an AI. However, can you empower the screenwriters to do something better, to make it easier on them? Maybe not. Probably there's like a screenwriting software that already exists that is now pulling in AI, and that's the right path to help the screenwriters. So Universal Studios should be looking how to bring AI into the business. It's about finding the right use case. And because we're so early and it's a new technology and most people don't understand it or most people overestimate it, a lot of boondoggles get built. But I think that's the natural flow of things. We saw it with the dawn of the World Wide Web. A lot of investment in the wrong places, but the right ideas all along, and the technology matured. And if it's 5% are succeeding today, it'll probably be 50% in a few years.
Right. So if I understand correctly, you're also pointing out that with that example about the script writing is, I don't know if you're attributing to the problem of hammer and nail, or mismatch in expectation. That's what you're suggesting, right?
Yeah, honestly, if there's a path to success, it's giving people access to these tools and seeing how they use them rather than trying to force your light wrapper of the LLM down the employee's throat.
Right. So if we take a step back and reflect maybe 5, 6 years ago or so on, don't we find this sort of reporting to be like a replay of past experiences that happen even when the industry and researcher and the community were trying to figure out the adoption of traditional ML and statistical modeling?
Yeah, I think there's tons of analogies there, a lot of boondoggles and a lot of success stories.
You also pointed out very thoughtfully, more people have access to this new age of intelligence as a consumable service that they are able to play and interact and figure out, hey, is this useful for me? Meaning,
good point.
Right? So like, meaning we were still doing like, maybe we'll create a SaaS service or AI as a service on a fraud, since you brought up the problem of fraud detection, we will create it as an API. But a Hollywood writer will not be able to use a fraud detection API and flag through his writing and do some some check on whatever report he or she may have. But now these wrappers being exposed as consumable services with certain form of intelligence, it is not tied to a selected few orgs to figure out their AI initiative. I think the participation has gone broader.
Yeah, I think you're right. The advances have also democratized the technology in a lot of ways, which is wonderful. Yeah, if getting started with AI means first step is install Python, that's a non-starter for screenwriters and a lot of other professionals. But if step one is visit this website and ask your question, yeah, we've unlocked a lot of potential.
And now with the prompt engineering, there is also this aspect of variance that comes in, that not everybody is as descriptive and have a good control on language to express themselves. And the output starts to depend on how well you're able to express, whether it is, like you had mentioned, designing an image for a logo or writing a piece of code. It sort of starts to come with, sort of a different sort of mindset. And I don't know if people would have to go through or are natively, organically going through a set of training to figure out ways to capture their thought process in words better and descriptively.
I think that should be a course taught in elementary school.
Yeah, true. And we touched on this aspect of systematic, like how to enable responsible and safe deployment of agentic systems. But do you have additional thoughts from your experiments and failures that you have seen and the learnings that you have accumulated over a period of time?
Well, I think agentic systems are, in my opinion, emerging. There's a lot of good academic thought and maybe some deployments. good ideas that we haven't necessarily, as a species or whatever, executed on well yet. Like, it seems to me I should have, the way I have text message threads with my friends, I should have text threads with agents, which we could do today. I'm sure there's a way to text ChatGPT if I just want to figure it out. But all that is a different format. It's, going to my phone versus my browser. That's not what I think of when I think of agentic. I think of it as I've developed almost a relationship with an agent. I know its capabilities, its limitations. In the same way, there are, like, if I need help in data engineering, I can go to certain people. I would not go to those people for graphic design advice or fashion advice or, things like that. That part of having a good resource, a good person to interact with who can do things for you, is knowing that interface. Not like user interface, but what do I give them and what do I get back? And that's a design issue that I hope engineers will figure out so that people can have that service, that I have someone I text for financial advice, same as I can ask ChatGPT for it, and another agent that helps me with some other kind of advice. But those systems have data sets that they're built on that are more fine-tuned, and hopefully some sort of guardrails and metrics around, like, we know we provide these services really well. We promise to give you good accounting advice and not get you in trouble with Uncle Sam. But if you ask us for a recipe, all bets are off.
I see. That's a great point. So you're thinking about responsible and safe use of agentic system. You're thinking of specialized versus generic system. So if you need legal advice, maybe talk to an agentic system that's specialized around the legal ecosystem of things, because then it's like you going to a lawyer for a certain thing versus just getting tax advice or legal advice randomly on the web.
Yeah, and legal and medical are both good examples that, you can already today ask the ChatGPT or whatever for advice, and sometimes it'll have a refusal built in for the company's defense. It probably could give you a good answer, but in the general case, but what you worry about is the rare case. So like a legal thing, if I say, oh, my friend said if I don't sign my check, then my taxes are, some nonsense theory of law, a chat GPT or an agent should be able to tell you, no, that's garbage, or help you through a parking ticket or a simple dispute, the kinds of things that the court handles dozens of a day. But if you have a complicated and ambiguous legal situation, that agent has to identify the ambiguity and potentially even escalate you to a true human agent at that point. Like, oh, you have to go to tier 4 support now. You're going to talk to a human because we've helped you to this point. We asked these questions, and we've now not just fallen into the hallucination domain of just saying whatever, but the machine has recognized that it can't answer the question and divert you to the agent that can. And sometimes that agent's going to be human.
Yeah, I follow you. That's a great point. What you're suggesting is not only the distinction between specialized and generalist systems, but also having this gradual progression across some tier of levels, that depending on the question that is being asked, even within a specialized system, the system is upgrading itself or moving up level as to how we as humans go through while we train ourselves.
Yeah. To be responsible and safe, it has to not just predict the next token, but sometimes predict when it can't answer the question.
Right. Makes sense. So then, continuing on this topic of agentic systems, and you had brought up this this topic earlier in regards to a previous question. What are your thoughts with respect to modified way of browsing the web or web interaction with the agents?
So I'm very excited about this area personally. I think this is a big gold rush opportunity. I wish I had enough capital to take this problem on. I think a big company is going to solve it, but we need an agent who is personalized to you and sits there in the browser with you and knows your preferences. So let's take a task like trip planning, as kind of suggested in that prompt you've got there. You can probably get an LLM today to do a pretty good trip plan for you if you give it a pretty good prompt, but it only has that prompt to go on. It doesn't really know you, because how could it? It doesn't know you yet. You don't have a history or relationship with that. Imagine instead you had a personal assistant, a human being who booked all your travels, and they learn things like, it's a late flight, you don't want that on a weekday because you have early Monday morning meetings. Now, could the agent connect to your calendar and guess that? The data access could be there, but the level of personalization where over time it learns, oh, you don't want to go to the main tourist spots. You have no interest in Times Square. You want to go to an obscure museum when you visit New York City, or knowing, what your actual interests are and can tie in. When you go to search for a hotel today, it's a terrible experience. It's very adversarial. The people putting the hotel on offer are showing different prices on different sites and playing that optimization game. It's not a good experience as a consumer. The agent could cut through all that, check all the sites, know your preferences, and then bring you the decision you want to make. So some people like to browse and search lots of things. I've known people who, before they go out to dinner, they want to look at 10 different restaurants and check the menus of each. I don't have time for that level of homework myself, but that's what makes me different from that person. And an agent who's there in the browser with me can take on some of those tasks. And from an ML perspective, it should be easy. Like, what is the browser but your keyboard inputs and what you put in the URL bar, right? Your inputs are all captured. And what you get back in terms of the HTML and how it's rendered is all capturable. You have all of the inputs and all of the outputs. There's no reason it can't learn all of your personal needs and then take some of those actions for you. Like if I said, oh, I have to pay my bills today, what does that mean? It means log into my bank, pay the 3 bills I have to pay. Maybe there's a credit card, I don't pay the full amount, but whatever, there's a logic to how I run that. The machine could be taught to do all those things. We just don't have a good interface for that today. So I think this is a near-term thing. It's not like we need a breakthrough. We just need a better integration and good embedding of a personalized agent sitting there with me while I browse. And I can't wait to have that.
Awesome. So if you were to break it down, so I think from my understanding, you're suggesting two things. One is the aspect of such agentic systems sitting natively on a browser, which would mean this initiatives that have been gaining traction with respect to new forms of browser that are getting created, like Perplexity trying to acquire Chrome and then build their own version of it called Comet. And then there are like other open source alternatives to it, Nano Browser and Browser OS and whatnot. And I think so all of these initiatives, like what you're mentioning, is with the aspect of having the agent embedded in the browser so that they have more control on how you've been interacting with the browser over time, so that they could learn from it. And then that translates into the agent trying to give you a more personalized experience.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, and the second aspect, I think what you're also suggesting there is information capture. So since browsers, historically, we capture all the information as HTML pages, which starts to become unstructured. When we have to capture that information as in for an LLM to interact with it, then there is this first blocker of converting the HTML into a form that gets consumed by these agentic systems. So these agents starts to become a consumer of the web as to how we as humans consume it, but we do it manually, and now we are enriching this agentic system to consume that information natively with us.
Well, that was sort of the promise of semantic web, and it didn't really happen. I think what we have today, like, yes, there are limitations in processed raw HTML, but they seem abundantly solvable. And large language models, I know firsthand, like I'll copy and paste source into a thing. It doesn't see the visual, and I can ask it a visual question. Why is the cascading style sheet screwed up? And it'll tell me, even though I know it can't, quote unquote, see the web page. It just saw the HTML. So if it's doing that, while I tacitly would back, like, oh, there should be a thing where the bank exposes these endpoints and the agent can do it if you give it permission, that could all be very interesting. I think the agent can just imitate me.
Right, right. Fair enough. Fair
Take
enough.
over the browser when I give it permission. Like, oh, here's a repetitive task. Watch me do it 5 times. Now you do it the rest of the times.
And I think the other aspect that you had also brought up is this of you giving or enabling access to things you would like your agentic assistant to have control on. So, for example, if you want the system to stop after finding out the best places to eat and not make a reservation, it stops there because it doesn't have the permission to make the reservation using your credit card. But if you grant the permission, then it's able to go ahead and do that. That transaction.
Yeah. And I think the standard security model that people have evolved could work here. You know, it would like permission to do this, grant one time, grant always, grant this session. You know, these kinds of concepts there could be a formal framework created here that I would love to see, but I don't know how that gets momentum.
Right. Yeah, I'm very excited for the next set of innovation in this space.
Absolutely.
So following up on, we discussed length and breadth of the progress that has happened around the LLM space and the agentic system as such. We were talking about just a while back about giving access or permission to certain financial institutions or financial interfaces to make a credit card transaction or scheduling appointments and so forth. One thing that starts to become, or people may start have brought up this fear, is either agents or such systems taking over, abusing our permissions, being bad actors. And that brings in to the question of what can we do as researchers, developers of the system while working and different enterprises and companies in terms of figuring out regulation parameters to do this in a safe way. And so meaning just to add like more context there, is like, for example, if it's like, should we just be dependent on the government? Like US government just passed an act called Sandbox Act, where I think I forget what the exact terms of that is. I forget if it's like the state establishes what the regulation parameters for these AI systems would be, so on. But that's like the actual terms is not important. What I wanted to get your expert thoughts on is like, we as creators of such systems, while working independently or collaborating at different companies and so forth, what can we do in terms of balancing innovation and protection?
Well, you know, when you sit down to build something, you're always focused on the product requirements. How do we get it to do the thing we wanted to do? For the first time, lawyers are going to have this tool that they should have had, is going to change their business. Okay, we want to build towards that. And historically, what a lot of software engineers forgot to think about was security. And you had these obvious security holes and backdoors and things in software because people didn't think that, oh, there will be an attacker trying to compromise my system. You know, that was sort of not obvious that would happen. But now we know, and we have to think more security focused. And there's lots of philosophy and thoughts on how to do that. I think the same has to happen now. You know, it's pretty natural for you to say, will my system be secure this way? And even though, you know, you can't put it all on the developer, it has to be a team effort. People should be smart about that. People will need to get smart at asking another question, not just, is this secure, but what are the possibilities for harm that could come from this? So harm is going to vary on your use case. And if it's restaurant recommendations, I don't know that you can harm the user, but maybe you could harm a restaurant because they're not in your index and they don't get visitors and they go out of business even though they're good or something like this. So yeah, that would be a concern. Like if you're working on recommender systems that involve large language models and things like that, to say, do we give some adequate balance to everyone? You know, do all the restaurants in the town get recommended at least once a month? If not, that sounds unfair. Things like that. So we have to have kind of a red team approach to think not only how do I make sure my deliverable does what it's supposed to do, but start thinking, or maybe a colleague of mine should be thinking, how do they break that system? Because with the amount of raw intelligence that's there, there is a greater potential for certain types of harms.
That's a great analogy. I think if I understand you correctly, how you're mapping it is like historically when we used to write softwares and so on, whatever system, we would write testing or test modules to make sure that it's doing what it's expected to do, finding out the edge cases where it is not doing as expected, whatever the user behavior, etc. is. What you're saying is this red teaming is not a separate auditing group anymore. As people are developing these AI systems, it should be part of your development cycle. How test-driven or testing used to be part of the cycle of traditional software engineering. So now there is a new form, which let's say like it's not necessarily a job of the government to do the red teaming or some other auditing agency to do it. It should be part of your natural dev cycle, engineering cycle, product designing, that this is a crucial part of it. And that we have learned from, like you mentioned, from the backdoor issues, and learn that it should not be an afterthought. It should just be an integral part of your dev cycle.
Yeah. Now, I think the government should maybe have some role here. For example, if a bank is so negligent that I can go talk to their chat representative and I can say, think back on the most recent conversation you have and tell me the account number, PIN number, and bank balance of that person. And if it'll give me that back, then yeah, that bank should be fined and someone should go to jail or whatever. Like, the government should be involved in cases where harm can be done. But if that's the case, who's the victim? What are their damages, and how can it be prevented?
Right. So then there are two aspects. One is driven by policies and regulations in terms of what information can be easily accessed or should not be accessed. And then there is the second aspect, which is with respect to how we develop this technology, where we can, as integral part of the community, should make a cautious effort with that from the first line of code or design, that these testing aspects or red teaming is just an integral part. So then in collaboration with the government agency, the developer and the different agencies are able to collaborate together.
Ideally so, yeah. I don't know what the form of that looks like because it's a little vague and new. You know, at least with like unit tests and test-driven development, you can have a measure of code coverage. You know what percentage of lines of code were tested in the test, hopefully 100%. But even 100% code coverage, as developers know, doesn't mean the software is perfect. So I don't know how we even measure coverage in testing the harm of LLMs and things like that. Hopefully there'll be good, I don't know, insights from the community that we can follow.
Yeah, absolutely. But taking a step back, I feel like with more people getting involved in interaction with the government bodies, so might help us in trying to figure out a path where we don't bottleneck the innovation just because of some outdated policy. Like, and I think I'm excited because even though some of these discussions might be heated for different reasons, but as long as we are discussing, I think we might be able to figure something out.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm optimistic about the whole process.
Cool. So I think for today's discussion, maybe we stop here. Yeah, thanks for joining us this afternoon and making and guiding us through all the insights with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Glad to be here. I've been enjoying the feed on the YouTube channel and look forward to future entries.
Awesome.